Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Helen Anderson, and I will be your anchor for tonight on APUSH News. Tonight we'll be talking about the New Deals and the early responses of President Franklin D. Roosevelt to the Depression, and how they were both effective and ineffective. But before we can go to our field reporters, I'm going to talk to you about President Franklin D. Roosevelt's goals for the New Deal. Beginning in the spring of 1933, Roosevelt's goals were to save the banks, relieve unemployment with the help of work relief programs, alleviate the starvation of the people, plan for industrial recovery, and plan for agricultural adjustment. Now we will go over to our field reporter, William McGurra, who will be interviewing Allison McGurra about the early programs which helped FDR to achieve his goals.
Who will explain to us how FDR's aforementioned goals are reflected by this early programs. Thank you for being here with us, Allie.
It's great to be here, Will. Thank you for having me. Back to FDR's goals. Shall we start with saving the banks?
Of course. What were some of FDR's programs that embraced his attempts to save the banks?
FDR created an Emergency Banking Act, which extended federal assistance to banks. Sound banks will reopen immediately with the help from our government, while troubled banks would be handed over to people who can guide them to solvency. These are called federal conservators. He also put in place the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporations. This was designed to prevent another stock crash. This also gave the government the power to regulate stocks, relations, and manage currency.
Interesting, very interesting. Let's move on to the relief for the unemployed.
Good choice, Will. FDR has placed programs to help workers through the 1933 to 1944 winter, such as the Civil Works Administration, aka the CWA, and the Civilian Conservation Corps, aka the CCC. The Tennessee Valley Authority helps relieve unemployment and contributes to regional planning.
What about the industrial recovery?
For the industrial recovery, FDR put in place multiple programs, one of which Hugh Johnson played a large role in. But let's start from the beginning. The National Industrial Recovery Act, aka the NIRA, is what made any sort of action leading to recovery possible. The Public Works Administration, aka the PWA, boosts industrial activity, and under the PWA, companies were put under a contract. This included the workers, who were tasked with helping to stimulate the economy with their purchases. Their purchases would leave a capital legacy.
What of Hugh Johnson's involvements?
Yes. Hugh Johnson works with the National Recovery Administration, also known as the NRA, not to be confused with the National Rifle Association. The NRA controlled competition among companies. Johnson created a code of fair practices. These fair practices included minimum wage, maximum hours, eliminating ways to get an edge by cutting wages or prices. It gave unions the right to organize, and workers the right to bargain with management. And if the prices were to jump, so were the wages.
Very nice. And finally, what is the plan for agriculture?
The Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933 limits the farmer's production. And I know what you're thinking. How could limiting production help agriculture? Just listen. The government pays the farmers to leave their land unsowed, and a tax on miller and cotton ginners will cover the finances. The limits on production would eliminate the surplus and would also drive up the demand for farm commodities. This allows our agriculture to recover. The Agricultural Adjustment Administration, the AAA, confined coverage to 7 basic commodities.
Are the programs that will help support the farmers?
The new Commodity Credit Corporation will give farmers loans if they store their crops rather than selling them. The Farm Credit Administration refinanced a fifth of all farm mortgages. The Resettlement Administration moves farmers to a more productive land to give them a fresh start. And the Farm Security Administration gives out low-interest loans to tenants to buy family farms.
Well, there you have it, folks. Thank you so much, Allie, for being here today. This is William McGurra reporting from the field. Back to you, Helen.
Thanks, Will. Now we're going to go on over to Brittany Wagner, who will be reporting on the second New Deal. Brittany?
Thanks, Allie. I've got some information about the second New Deal that Roosevelt has recently launched in light of the upcoming 1936 presidential elections. The second New Deal isn't really its own program, but is more of an extension of the existing one. There's been a lot of national tension spreading amongst Americans since they feel like the first New Deal didn't really solve a lot of their problems. In fact, there are currently around 11 million people in America right now who can't find work. Following the initial shock of the Depression, Roosevelt did fix a lot of problems, but his efforts simply didn't reach far enough. Just recently, 6,000 workers flooded a city hall in Minneapolis, seeking higher wages for federal jobs and more benefits. The Second New Deal is trying to address those problems directly and will work to regulate business, allot relief amongst the suffering and jobless, and take more dramatic steps toward reform. We're also seeing some steps being taken toward a federal welfare program funded by the government, which would really benefit millions of people. This period of time right after the midterm elections is critical for the candidates to gain support from the people, and the Second New Deal is really an attempt to right the wrongs of the First New Deal, or even just to cover the things that the New Deal initially missed, and to show the American people that Roosevelt is on their side and do whatever it takes to gain their respect and support. A few programs that are said to be launched under the umbrella of the Second New Deal are the Works Progress Administration, the Rural Electrification Administration, and the National Labor Relations Act. Now we'll go to Evita, who will tell us more about those policies and the other policies that will be put into motion.
With the Second New Deal coming to a close, it is time to recognize some of its successes and failures. The New Deal has left behind different legacies, although we can safely say it never spent enough to end the Depression. It was an attempt to deal with different elements of the calamity in ways that sometimes seemed unsystematic and occasionally were contradictory. But the New Deal enjoyed some notable accomplishments, even if it failed to promote full-scale economic recovery. One of the most prominent political actions was the Social Security Act passed in 1935. This act sought to help those who could not help themselves. It acted as an economic stabilizer and marked a great reversal in American politics. Much like the wealth tax who threatened to soak the rich, the Public Utilities Holding Company Act of 1935, which limited utility empires, were both political victories for the New Dealers. The Hoover Dam was one of the projects that went through during the New Deal. With just a push of a button, Roosevelt was able to send water rushing from the Hoover Dam in Colorado all the way to cities as far as Los Angeles. The New Deal extended federal power in its water management programs, but later became an ecological problem. When it came to women, the New Deal was more focused on aiding and protecting them rather than employing them. But even the Social Security Act was not enough to help them, because in the end it did not cover domestic servants, which were mostly made up of women. The New Deal has pledged itself to the forgotten Americans, but it failed to aid the neediest of all, which were the sharecroppers, migrant workers, and tenant farmers. What then was the goal of Roosevelt? Capitalism remained, and the New Deal rarely overturned cultural conventions. As the New Deal continues to wind down, Americans can confidently say that it is leaving a legacy of change. With government obtaining a broader role in the economy and the New Deal creating stabilizers to avoid future breakdowns, it is not fair to say that it was altogether a total ruin. President Roosevelt, along with the rest of the New Dealers, modernized the presidency and turned the White House into the heart of the government. The actual scope of the government has grown from 1935 with only 605,000 members to now 1939 with nearly 1 million. It has instilled security back into the people as it has sent many back to work. It has also improved the infrastructure of the United States by providing a network of schools, hospitals, and roads. It seems as if this era of the New Deal, along with the government, has touched Americans in a way that has never been seen before. It has made them more secure, strengthened the middle class, and created a guideline to a future welfare state, although economically it was less successful. Along with all of this, the New Deal has seemed to encourage democracy in America. It is now becoming obvious that Americans are assuming that in hard times the government would help them. But for now, only time will tell. This is Evita reporting for APUSH News.
Thanks, Evita. It's time to say goodnight, ladies and gentlemen. This has been Helen Anderson reporting for APUSH News. Thank you.
Run for cover, my sense of fear is running thin.